Hi, welcome back to Mr. Rowley's Virtual Music Classroom. Today we're going to do Lesson 3 of the Songwriting Series. And this lesson is about using the melody that we created in Lesson 2 and then harmonizing that melody. That's what today's lesson is. How do we harmonize that melody? In order to understand how to do this, you need to have an understanding of chords. And if you don't understand chords yet, my best suggestion is to go to the Music Theory series and look at Lesson 6. Lesson 6 there is a beginning discussion about chords. And we're going to use chords that are simple triads like the ones in that lesson. So back to this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to take the melody that we've written, which is just the first stanza of the song that we wrote. Remember, in Lesson 1, we created the words and the rhythm. In Lesson 2, we turned those rhythms into melody. And now we're going to take that melody and add chords to it, or the harmonization of that melody. It's not the whole song. We're just using one part of the song. At the end of the next lesson, I'll actually play the entire song for you and show you how it came out, the whole entire thing. So what we're going to do today is introduce how you look at a melody and then how you can add chords to it. And always remember, there is no right or wrong answers to this. And nothing is set in stone when you're writing music. It can always change. Let's take a look at this and get going. So let's take another look at our melody and listen to it once with the computer sounds. And then we'll start discussing of the strategies that we can use to put chords to it and to make musical sense. When choosing chords to harmonize a melody, it is that. It's about choices. Sometimes there's better choices than others. We're going to talk a little bit about how to make those choices, but I want you to refer back to the chord lesson in music theory, the Music Theory series, lesson number 6, because one of the things we need to keep in mind is that there is a series of chords or a sequence of chords that works best. In much popular forms of music, which this would kind of fall in the category of that. It's children's music, and so you want to keep the chords fairly simple, but you don't necessarily have to at the same time. So there's some choice chords that are better choices than others, and sometimes you'll use chords that aren't necessarily used a lot in popular forms of music. Usually we use the 1, the 4, and the 5 chord. Those are the most popular. 1, 5, 1 correspondences with chords are the best to kind of start with, but you can always go farther. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 measure increments, talk about the pitches that are in the melody, and then what chords could be used for those and what chords are best for those. So as you can see, in the first 2 full measures, we have the note G, then the note A, then the note B, and then in the second measure, the notes D. So theoretically, the notes in the tonic chord, or the first chord in the key of G, which remember, we're in the key of G. We made that decision when we wrote the melody. So the 1 chord in the key of G would be the G major. And you have a G, a B, and a D in the first 2 measures. So theoretically, you could put a G for the entire first 2 measures, and that would be just fine. However, the A on the word in is on a strong beat. That concerns me a little bit. It's okay. It will be just fine on the in the G chord. Remember, the notes in the G chord are G, B, and D. A is not in there. So that would be what we call a non-chord tone. Then we have to make a decision about harmonic rhythm. Harmonic rhythm is one of those things that we again need to make a choice about. The harmonic rhythm is how fast or at what rhythm the chords change. Do they change each measure, so they're a whole note in length? Do they change every 2 beats, half notes in length? Do they change every beat, quarter notes in length? There is no rule about how long they should last, but you're making a decision. And sometimes you need that decision to be made so you have consistency when you're harmonizing your song. So I'm going to make a decision, and I'm going to say I don't want the first two measures to all be one chord. It's just, to me, there's more interest if I add more chords. So then I decide, okay, I know that that first chord in that first four measure, the G half note above the word spring, I'm going to have that be the tonic chord. That's an easy decision. And I'm pretty sure it's going to be a tonic chord for those first two beats. And then I have the A, and the A is on a strong beat, that third beat of the measure. Now, what chords in this key have the note A in them? Well, the first one that comes to mind is the 5 chord, because that's the next one I'm going to think about. The 5 chord is D, F sharp, A. That would work. But then I look at the B at the end of that measure. Now, that's a very weak beat. It's on the and, or the half beat of the beat count 4. So it goes by pretty fast. And in the next measure, it's all Ds. Well, then I'm thinking, okay, all Ds, yes, that could still be another G chord. So I could go G chord on spring, D chord on in, and another G chord on valley, because the notes in the G chord are G, B, and D. That would work. But again, I'm making a different choice. I'm going to put the 5 chord on the second measure, for the whole measure. So what chord works good going from 1 to 5 in between? And so I'm thinking about other chords that have the A in it. Well, I have F sharp AC, which is the 7 chord. Well, the 7 chord is not used very often. Remember, it's a diminished chord. And so it's actually going to sound like a 5 chord with a missing note, with the missing D. And that's something we can talk about later and why it would sound like that. But if you listen to it, it's going to sound like that. So the next and only other chord that has the A in it in the key of G is the A minor chord, or what we call the 2 chord. Well, that makes a lot of sense, because if I was thinking about what chord leads to 5 other than 1, one of the best chords that leads to 5 is the 2 chord, or the A minor chord in this key. So that's what I'm going to choose to do. I'm going to put a G chord above the note G and the word spring, an A minor chord above in, and then a D chord above valley. And that's a choice I'm going to make for those first 2 measures. So I'm going to check those 3 chords out and see if they sound right. Here's my first 2 pitches. It's spring in the valley. I like it. Let's see if it's going to work with all of it, though. Now I'm going to take a look at the next 2 measures and see, again, do the same thing we did with the first 2 full measures. So on the word snow, I have a long note, dotted quarter note, that is the note pitch C. And then it's followed by a B, it's a very short note and in a weak spot in the rhythm. And then I have another A on the word ice, and then melt away, G-A-B. So, again, I'm going to look at it and see what I could do. Now, I know that a good chord progression in this style of music would have 1 chords, 4 chords, and 5 chords. We've already made that discussion. And the 4 chord in this key is the chord C, C-E-G. So that's a good choice for that note on the word snow, because it's a C. Now that B there, I'm not going to really pay attention to it, because we call that a passing tone. When we get later on in music theory lessons, we'll talk about, taking every single note and giving it a name or something so we can understand how it's functioning. But just let's just say that, understand that that's a note between the C and the A, and it goes by really fast. So the next note, the A, is another strong beat, And I've already established in the first full measure that we have a harmonic rhythm of half notes. Now I know the second measure, we didn't have half notes, we had a whole note. So the harmonic rhythm in the first full measure, half note, then whole note. And I'm looking at these next two measures, measures 3 and 4, half note, whole note. That makes sense to me. So what chord could I put on that A? Again, we could go 4 to 5. Makes sense. And the next strong beat, which is the B in the next measure, 5 going to G, that makes a lot of sense because the note B is in the chord G, and that would work. It's not the tonic note, or obviously it's not a G, so it won't sound like an actual ending. So again, that's not an okay thing because it's not the end of the musical phrase. The end of the musical phrase is the word wake. But again, I like to change things up a bit. I'm not thinking that that should be a G. What's another chord in the key that has the note B in it? Well, we've already talked about G has G, B, and D. The chord that's built on B, the 3 chord, B, D, F sharp. Again, it's a pretty weak chord. We don't see that normally in the sequence of chords for this style of music. Doesn't make a lot of sense. So the next one is the 6th chord, or the E minor chord. And then I go back to the A on the word ice. I say, so what would lead to an E minor chord? Well, the A minor chord, which I used in the first full measure, works again. And it gives us what we call a cadence, or we call this a half cadence, that's halfway through the musical phrase. It's kind of an ending, but not really the ending. And rather than give it a tonic note, I'm going to give it the E minor, the 6th chord. It'll almost sound like an ending, but not really, not quite. So again, I think that might work. A C chord on the word snow, another A minor chord on the word ice, and then a E minor chord on the word way. And all those other notes in between work just fine with the choices we made. So let's do the same thing we just did with the first 2 full measures, with these 2 measures, and see if it works. It's our first pitch. Snow and ice melt away. I like it. Let's see if it works with the other 2. So we'll put them all together. It's spring in the valley, snow and ice melt away. So far, so good. Let's keep working. Let's go on to the next 2 measures. So in the next 2 measures, which is the full measures 5 and 6 in the piece, again, we're going to look at the pitches and decide which pitches we're going to base our chord choices on. So we start rivers and streams with an A. But look at the A, and then it's a G, and then back to an A, and the G is a longer pitch. So even though that G seems to be on a weak beat, it is the longer sounding pitch for those 2 beats. So because we ended on an E minor beforehand, I think we need to go back to the tonic here, even though the A is a non-chord tone. And in pop music, this happens all the time, where the chord tone actually happens on the offbeat. And that's okay. Now we look at the word streams, and the pitch there is B. So we could have a G for this entire measure, and it would work just fine. However, we've set up a harmonic rhythm of half note, whole note, half note, whole note in the 2 previous sets of measures. So we might want to keep that same pattern going. But then we don't have to. Again, these are choices we're making. This part of the musical phrase is kind of the meaty part. It's 2/3 the way through this phrase. So I do like doing half note. But with the B, what pitch am I going to use? What chord am I going to use? So if I look at the A, G, A. I'm going to put a tonic on that one. So there's going to be a G chord on that. The next best, not a B chord. That doesn't make any sense because, again, it's the 3 chord. Just not a strong chord in the progression, especially with this style of music. So I'm going to go back to the 6 chord. 6 chord following 1 chord is a really, really easy chord progression. Makes a lot of sense. And we've already used it in a previous measure. So going back to it makes some musical sense. Going to the next measure, high and mighty. High is a C. And we could use the 4 chord there because 6 going to 4, again, makes sense. But we're kind of leaning on this minor feel a little bit, and I like that. And then we get to the D, and the D tells us, man, that's strong 5 right there. It could be a 1 chord, could be a B chord. Again, we're going to stay away from the B chord. So I'm thinking just a solid 5 chord. So what should high be? Well, we made that choice up earlier to go A minor D in the first 2 measures, so maybe we keep that same progression here. A minor on high because the note C is in the A minor chord. The note D, of course, is in the D chord. So for this one, we go G, E minor, A minor, and there's a nice relationship between E minor and A minor, and then to the D. So for these 2 measures, again, G, E minor, A minor, D. And it fits the pitches that are there. So let's try that one. Rivers and streams run high and mighty. I like it. It works. Let's see how it works with everything. So this is 6 of our 8 measures of this phrase. Let's try the whole thing, see how it works. We're 3/4 of the way done. It's spring in the valley, snow and ice melt away, rivers and streams run high and mighty. So far it's working really good. So now we're going to look at the last 2 measures of the phrase, and what we really want to do when we're at the end of a phrase, and especially at the end of the first phrase in a song, we want to make it a nice solid ending. Gives that, first of all, it's the first setup of what the form may be. And so ending on the tonic is something I want to do. And the melody does that for us because it ends on a G. So we start on a B, and then we have a G, but then we have a G and F sharp. And then we have another G. So I know that the best way to make a strong ending is to go end with 5-1. So with the note on winter being B and having the D chord right before it in the previous measure, I think the best choice here is not a minor chord, but the G major chord, because we're setting up this nice strong 5-1 feeling at the end, and it'd be even stronger if we go 1-5-1. So putting a G chord on that note B, and then knowing that the word wake is also going to be a G, then how do I get that 5 in there? But the note is G, G, F sharp, G. And I want that 5 chord to be there longer than a half a beat, because I could put the D chord right above the F sharp. That makes total sense. But I could also set up some tension a little bit by putting the D chord above the G on the word world. I know it's not a chord tone, but it actually sets up some tension. It's not then nice and feels really comfortable when we get to the word wake. So winter world comes awake, G, D, and then G again, 1-5-1. But I'm also going to make another choice here. And that choice is one that we didn't talk about in the chord lesson 6 in the music theory lessons. And that is, I can add another note to that D chord and make it even stronger feeling of wanting to go to the 1 chord. And if I add a 4th note stacked in thirds on top of that D chord, remember D, F sharp, A, the next note is C. And the C and the G like each other. They get along really well. The F sharp is going to be in contrast with that G, but we have F sharp on the first part of the word awake. So if I put a D7, which is D, F sharp, A, C, then I've got a stronger 1-5-1, and now it's 1-5-7-1. And again, we'll talk about that 5-7 later in another music theory lesson. But I really like what that's going to sound like. So if I just play Winter World Comes Awake, Winter World Comes Awake. So G, D7, so let's put the whole thing together and see what it sounds like. It's spring in the valley, snow and ice melt away, rivers and streams run high and mighty, a winter world comes awake. Other than my terrible singing, I think it's a good shot. So, as with any work of art, nothing's ever really set in stone. Things can always be changed. That will be true of any song you write, and it's true of this song that we have here. I've only written the melody and now added chords or harmonization to the first section of the song. In the next lesson, I'll have the song completed, and we'll know the form. I will also have completed all the harmonization. But what we've done on this lesson is only added block chords. I've only strummed the guitar on the chords in a block each time that the chords change, or along with the harmonic rhythm. As we move forward, and what the next lesson will be about, we'll be taking those chords and then making an arrangement out of the song. Having the guitar play more than just block chords, for instance. Maybe there's a strumming pattern, or maybe there's a picking pattern that will play single notes within the chords, like an arpeggio, like we talked about in the chord lesson in music theory. We also might add other instruments to it. And so the next songwriting lesson will be how to take your song and make an arrangement out of it. So with this lesson, I hope that you've got some more understanding and how chords work, and how chords work with melody, and how you can take chord tones from melody notes and figure out what chords would work best in certain situations. As always, there's never a right or wrong answer. You play or you create what sounds good to you. If it sounds good to you, it's going to sound good to somebody else. I hope you've enjoyed this lesson. I hope you've learned something. This is just one little tip of the iceberg on what we do with songwriting. We'll continue to work on different songs, different ways of approaching, and obviously as we learn more chords and more music theory, we can add that to our creations as well. I hope you come back. I hope you're learning something. I hope you're having a good time. Thanks for listening. Again, I hope you enjoyed the lesson. As always, hope to see you again. Like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.